Hello, this is Virtualis Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Welcome to another episode of Chess Noob Review, where I look at some of my games, particularly from the perspective on how they could have been improved. We're going to look at a game of the Ruy Lopez Opening, the Jaenisch Gambit, the exchange variation, and especially down the Queen H5 line. This is a very common line in the Jaenisch Gambit exchange variation that is seductive for white. It's practically a trap, but where they trap themselves, and surprisingly bad. I'm going to go through why the line is bad, along with some of the tactics that I could have used but didn't see in the game itself. Firstly, let's have a quick look at the review, and you can see where that Qh5, Queen H5 was done by the opponent. And after that, I capture a commanding advantage for the rest of the game. So back to the analysis. The Ruy Lopez, of course, is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and the Ruy Lopez bishop b5. Jaenisch Gambit, immediate f5, and exchange variation where the opponent takes the knight and I take back the bishop. And that's very natural. Knight captures the pawn on e5, and a move to know is queen to d4, forking the pawn and knight, and of course that potentially comes with check as well. Now here, the single most common move for white, thinking about how they're going to extricate themselves from this dilemma, is that they'll see this move, Queen H5, which comes with check, and then they see the knight in that position as well. They know that sort of pattern. Usually, that's really good for the attacking queen. And at the end of a series of trades, often the rook becomes attacked. So this is a very, very common move for people who, in fact, may be trapped into thinking. People who are a little more advanced, in fact, may be led into playing down this line. Queen H5 with check. If we look at the feedback, it's instantly bad. As you can see, Stockfish on the online engine to depth 30 calls it a blunder, minus 3.7. Now, I analyzed all these moves with an external Stockfish engine. So Stockfish 15 with the neural network to depth 40. So some of the moves here are pretty tricky, and at lower depth, at depth 30, Stockfish actually doesn't identify the best moves. At depth 40, it's not quite as bad. It's a minus 2.8, but still pretty bad for white. Why is it bad? Well, the reason is we have G6 as a response. Attacking the queen, of course, these two pieces are still being forked by our queen as well. So in fact, the only good move for white in this position is to capture that pawn with their knight, which they do. Now, the problem for white is that we can now just straight up capture back with the pawn on h7. And normally, this is where, that rook will be in trouble. Now, it will be sort of discovered, it's basically hanging, it's discovered attack. But in this particular sort of variation with the queen sitting on d4, geometrically, it protects the rook, which of course means we just won that knight for a pawn, well, for a couple of pawns. So this is pretty good for black, and this is why this move was in fact a blunder originally. Now here, the opponent will usually take that pawn, which comes with check, and then the second move to really know in this position is you must move king to d8. That is the best move. Everything else is not so good. Now, in this position, my opponent opted to short castles. And this was a mistake. I didn't recognize it was as bad a mistake as what it was, but here Stockfish calls it a mistake, minus 6.6. But at depth 40, it's even worse, minus 7.4. And the reason is we have semi-open H-file, G-file, and after that captures F-file. So I have a preformed big attack against the king side. And this was a mistake for the opponent to sort of castle into that potential attack. Now, I didn't actually conceptualize this in the game, and it's something that I'll need to think about more deliberately and explicitly as I move forward in my chess journey. Now, in the game, I decided to play knight to e7, which of course attacks the queen. And usually in this position, this is a good move. Now, in this game, it's still a good move. Let's say if the opponents had moved the pawn rather than short castles, this would be the best move, I think. However, in this game, because they did short castles, there's a much more powerful move, which I didn't see. I discovered this sort of afterwards, so we're sort of analysing the game. And that move is bishop to d6 immediately. Two attackers now on the h2 pawn. And what might that look like? Now, here, the opponent might decide to first give a check. That kind of makes sense. I can block that check with a knight move. And now they might think, okay, let's attack, attack my queen, to maybe win a little bit of tempo and to kick it out of their territory. And if they did that, now I've got a forced mate line. In fact, it's, let's have a look at what Stockfish reckons. It's mate in 6. So what might that look like? Firstly, bishop captures a pawn on h2 with check. King is forced to move to the h-file. Bring the bishop back, discover attack. King, of course, now must move back. And now, rook to h1, attacking the queen. Basically a rook sacrifice. And I think Stockfish calls that a brilliant move. So they have to take, obviously. And now, queen to h8 with check. And now, potentially they can block the check. They can delay the agony by one move. But capture, check again, king forced to move. And now, checkmate. A beautiful checkmate line, something to look out for, and why having these semi-open files is really, really problematic for white in this particular variation. Now, I wasn't clever enough to see this in the actual game, and as I said, I played knight e7. Now, Stockfish didn't like it, but that's only because there was that much more powerful line. In this line, I'm still minus 4.5, so pretty much winning. Queen goes back, I place rook to g8, attacking the queen again, and of course, once the queen moves, I still have the attack on that g2 pawn. Very, very nice. Now they move the queen. Here, I think that was potentially the best move, but I thought, let's trade the queens. Let's just whack the queens. Their queen is their only active piece, the only developed piece. If I take out the queen, I will have potentially a pretty powerful attack. And that's what I did. Queens are gone. And of course, with that pawn being pinned, I have an immediate powerful next move attack. Yep, so that's fine. There we go. They move, capture the rook. They capture back. Here, I want to, try to get the rook out, bring the king out of the way. They take. That's fine. Now, do have to be careful. The knights are pretty tricky, so I just need to defend that. There we go. Rook is now, the other rook is now centralized. There we go. Again, pretty tricky. That comes with check as well, but that's fine. King back, effectively manually castled. They sort of attack the knight, but that doesn't really work there. That knight doesn't have enough to do by itself. And now, they sort of now move that back. There we are, lined up in a battery, looking very good. So I want to get rid of that bishop, of course. There we go. They're going to have to do something. And here, happy to trade. There we are. Take. Then forced to move their king. Knight forward. So I was thinking potentially this. However, there is a better move. So here I did actually capture that pawn, again inviting the trade, but actually I had a faster mate. And again, it's sort of a pattern to see here, and that is rook to g2 with check, king forced, of course, to h1. Now bring the other rook to f2. Both rooks now on the second rank, very powerful. Doesn't matter what they do now. Rook to h2, king back, rook to g2, and that is checkmate because the king has nowhere else to go. Good game, GG. Now, I didn't see that lovely pattern in the game itself, and as I said, instead, I took that pawn, they captured, I captured their knight, and now I was very, very happy. So that undeveloped rook has nowhere to go. I decide to attack that pawn. What are they going to do? Take with check. And here, either I know they have to move back to prevent checkmate, and then I win that pawn. They didn't see that. Ladder mate, good game, GG. My big takeaway from this game is to consider the board dynamic before castling. Castling into open files is very risky. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.